Hello. Today I'm going to track internal cooldowns. There are a couple of different internal cooldowns that a typical player might want to track. They include things like your weapon enchant, so power torrent in my case, or maybe an enchant on your cloak like the light weave embroidery that tailors can do. It would also include things like trinket procs, which, damn it, I didn't have one equipped. I have a Dark Moon card here, which gives you a spell power buff, and then it's on internal cooldown. It's not a proc per minute trinket or enchant like Crusader was in Classic, and it's not an on-use trinket like some of the stuff you can find on a vendor where you click it or push a button that it's bound to and you use it on demand. So there's no way to query the trinket and say, hey, when will I get my next proc? You have to do this all with sort of custom timing stuff. I've made sort of a preview, which is not something I normally do for these videos. But you can see here, these are my 3 procs. So the first one is Light Weave here, and it's tracking this. There's Power Torrent here. And my last one is my Dark Moon card. And so right now it's tracking the procs. And then as they expire, they start filling up again. And this is the internal cooldown as a progress bar. Now, all 3 of these have a 45-second internal cooldown, which is probably not ideal, but I just don't have access to something with a longer internal cooldown. It sucks, but it's true. So you can see these are all on internal cooldown, and when the bars are completely filled, they'll come off internal cooldown and be ready to proc again. So Power Torrent is off, it can proc anytime now. Here comes a Volcano card and Light Weave, there we go. So you can see Power Torrent is now depleting. That's because it's procced. Here's a Volcano card depleting. And Light Weave is apparently ready to proc, but it hasn't yet, so you can see it's just sitting there as an icon. I guess it's being lazy. There it is. Maybe I'm wrong about the Light Weave internal cooldown. Maybe it's a little longer. Nope, I'm just unlucky. So I'm going to show you how to set up those bars. I'm going to start by deleting these entirely. It's just for a preview. And we're going to build that from scratch. So to start with, I'm going to set up a progress bar. And I'm going to give it a ugly texture. I think I was using graphite or maybe gloss in that example. Probably gloss, it's a little brighter. I'm going to get rid of the text. But if you wanted to, you could leave one of these set to, for example, %p, and that would display the progress, so how long is remaining. But I don't really want that, I'm just going to use them graphically. I'm going to turn off the icons entirely. What else do I want to do? I think I'm going to make these bars 100 pixels by something pretty wide, let's say 36. So they're kind of fat and stocky. I'm going to get rid of the border. So this is all just graphical stuff. Obviously, you pick things that fit your UI. That looks okay. I'm going to make these bottom to top. Nope, top to bottom. So there we go. We can see this is a depleting bar. That looks good. I'm going to call this... Let's do Volcano card first. So actually, let's do Power Torrent first. So we'll call this PT ICD for Power Torrent internal cooldown. And I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm just going to call it PT proc. So this will track the actual buff on me. What else? Maybe I'm going to switch the colors up. I'm going to make this one yellow, and I'll make the internal cooldown yellowish, a little bit darker though. There we go. So I have 2 auras, one to track the proc and one to track the internal cooldown. The proc is really easy to track. We've done this in other videos. It's just an aura called Power Torrent, and it's a player buff. So you don't really need to set anything else. That's ready to go. The internal cooldown, however, is a little tricky. The internal cooldown is the 45-second period from the time you gain the buff until the time it's next possible to gain it. And that's not accessible to you in-game. There's no drop-down list you can just type in the trinket name or something and have it work. You have to do a little bit of effort on your own to make this happen. My first approach would probably be to use custom and just write a whole pile of custom Lua, but that's more of a nerd thing to do and not really necessary. What you want to do is come to Event and switch it to Combat Log. And this will let us handle combat log events with sort of drop downs. It's a little less powerful, but because we're not doing anything super complicated, this is going to be enough to get our job done. So what we're looking for is a spell message, aura applied. The source unit is going to be the player, and the destination unit is going to be the player. And the spell name is going to be Power Torrent. So what we're looking for here is the player casting Power Torrent on the player. When that shows up in our combat log, that will make this aura display. And then we need to set how long to display this for. And so we can set that to the internal cooldown of the enchant we're tracking. So Power Torrent is 45 seconds. And just like that, this is now tracking the internal cooldown. I can show that by offsetting this a little bit. I'm just going to drag this to the right. And because it's tracking a cooldown, I'm going to make it invert so it fills up instead of depleting. So the proc will tick down and the ICD will tick up. I'm just going to dot this up and hopefully Power Torrent procs right away. Volcano card. There we go. So there's Power Torrent. You can see here's the proc tracker ticking down, and here's the internal cooldown ticking back up. Now, in order to make it look like one bar, what I did is simply placed both bars in the same position so that they overlapped. Now, one of the problems is you're going to have both bars visible at the same time. And because there's some transparency involved, having one above the other isn't going to be enough to block things out. It's going to look really bad. So I'm going to come and change this internal cooldown trigger just slightly. I'm going to say aura removed instead of aura applied. And so what that's going to do is say when the player loses Power Torrent, start this timer. Now, that's going to throw off our internal cooldown calculations because it's 45 seconds from when you gain the buff, not when you lose it. So all I'm going to do is take the total length of the internal cooldown, it's 45 seconds, and I'm going to subtract the length of the buff, which I think is 15 seconds. I should probably check. I think it's 15, so I'm going to say 45 minus 15 is 30. Hit OK. And I'll just make this proc. Oh, it's only 12. That's easy enough to fix. ICD is 33. And just like that, I'm ready to track internal cooldowns now. You can see the buff just expired, and here's my internal cooldown tracking up. And when this finishes filling, don't know why I'm bothering to stay in combat. I guess because I want my proc to happen as quickly as I can. We can see it just filling up the internal cooldown. I'm also tracking it down here with Forte Exorcist, so you can kind of confirm things. So it's fulled up. It's off cooldown. We should expect a proc. There it is. And then this is the buff on me ticking down, and as soon as this expires, we'll get the internal cooldown bar filling back up. There we go. So it works kind of like maybe how you would track Death Knight runes or something like that. And I kind of like the whole depleting resource filling back up thing. I quite like the way that works. So the last thing I'm going to do is just toss a simple icon underneath it for my own identification. Say PT icon. And for trigger, I'm going to choose something that's basically always true. So I'm going to choose status, unit characteristics, player is a priest. That'll work. And then I'm just going to choose a custom icon. So Power Torrent. So there we go. A little too big. I'm just going to adjust this down to 36 by 36 to match the width of the bars. And so now we've got all these components of our tracker. A little ugly, they're kind of scattered. And I could lay them out by dragging them around or setting their offsets here. That's a lot of work, and it's going to fill up my list of auras pretty quick and just be kind of difficult to handle. So instead I'm going to put them into a group. I'm going to call this Power Torrent. And I'm going to move in both of these progress bars first. So by clicking on them, clicking on this little arrow, and then clicking on the group. And there we go, they're all in. And there's some group options here for positioning it. I'll come back to that. So I want to have all of these anchored to the bottom of the group. I think that'll be the easiest way to lay things out. So in this whole group, they're anchored to the bottom. There we go. So you can see the locks on the bottom. That's sort of the anchor point. And then I want my icon to be at the bottom with my bars on top. So all I'm going to do is move the bars up. The height of the icon, 36, plus 1, so there's a little bit of a gap. Let's come to the Y offset here and choose 37. And do the same here. Y offset 37. Maybe I'll reorder this just to look pretty. So there we go, that's my tracker. You can see now that they're in a group, I can drag the whole works. And that's a little easier to manage. Maybe I want to set its offset to something like -400, and its Y to something like -100. Whatever. And so now, the last thing I want to do is set load conditions. So I'm just going to say in combat, if you're a priest, that is level 85. So there I am. If I get in combat, I'll see my icon for Power Torrent, and as soon as it procs, we get a thing tracking the buff. And the buff is about to expire. There it goes, and now we can see the internal cooldown is filling up. So that's working pretty good. Now I could obviously go through the same steps and create, one for Power Torrent, one for Light Weave, and just kind of work my way through, but that seems like a lot of work. So instead what I'm going to do is just duplicate this a couple of times and do some minor edits to work on the other internal cooldowns. There we go, Power Torrent's off ICD, and it procced, and we can see it's got its tracker up again. So that's awesome. So now to make one for Light Weave and Volcano Card. There's no duplicate option for groups, which is kind of annoying, but you can fake it by just coming to Export to String, copying, and then coming to New, Import, and pasting. And you'll see you just get a second copy of the group now. So you can come in and rename it to, let's say, Light Weave. And I can come in and change the icon. I could just rename this to LW icon. Choose a new one, call it Light Weave. We'll change its proc bar color to something purple, and its cooldown bar to a darker purple. And the last thing to do is just set the triggers. So the spell name is not Power Torrent, it's Light Weave. The internal cooldown is the same, it's 45 seconds. And the buff length of time is the same, it's 15 or 12 seconds. So there's no need to edit this at all. But if there was, you could just recalculate the difference between the internal cooldown and the length of the buff. So I'm going to leave this the same. And we'll come to the proc tracker, and I'll rename that to LW proc. This is just to keep them sane. I like to have nice names. So we'll come to the proc, and the trigger, we just have to change the spell name. So we'll call this Light Weave. And just like that, we have a second group. We can toggle these both on. You can see they're overlapping, so rather than moving each of those auras individually, I'm just going to move the whole group. Move a little bit to the left, say minus 437, so there's a 1 pixel gap. So that's working. And I'm going to make one more for Volcano card real quick, which I can do by just coming to New and Import and pasting that same string, because these are all the same. And I'm going to rename this to DMC Volcano. And I know this was 37, so that should be what, 32? 72? Plus 2. 74. And then I just need to do some minor changes to the elements in there. So the icon is wrong. I'll call this Volcanic Destruction. And it needs a bar color. For the proc, something blue is probably appropriate. And for the internal cooldown, same thing, it's just blue. And then we'll edit the triggers. So the spell name is Volcanic Destruction. And this has a 45-second internal cooldown with a 12-second buff, so I don't need to edit this, but again, just do the simple math. And the same thing here. Volcanic Destruction. And I suppose I should rename these icons real quick. So DMC icon, rename DMC proc, and this can be DMC ICD. And just like that, we are tracking all of the internal cooldowns on our trinkets and our enchants. See, everything just procced and they're all nice ticking down here. Oh, Lightweave lasts slightly longer, so I'll have to come in and adjust that. So I guess Lightweave is 15 seconds. I probably should have paid more attention. So that's easy enough to fix. Proc is still the same, we just need to fix its internal cooldown, which is, say, 30 seconds. And that's it. You're now able to track our internal cooldowns using WeakAuras. Let's get in combat here. There we go. Volcano card is procced and ticking down. There's our power torrent. They should come up on ICD pretty quick. We can see there's the ICDs filling up. There's Lightweave, so yeah, it was 15 seconds, ticking down. And I wonder if that's a 1 minute cooldown. Nope, Lightweave is saying, or Forte Exorcist says it's 45, so I'm going to trust that, and I just got unlucky. But there we go, we can see the procs being tracked and the internal cooldowns filling up. Keep in mind that you could do the same thing to track other cooldowns. Like, for example, boss abilities have internal cooldowns, and you could use the same sort of combat log filter to say when a specific unit named Ragnaros casts, I don't know, maybe Molten Seeds is an ability. If you know that that has a 1 minute cooldown, you could do the same sort of thing and say, okay, Ragnaros casts Molten Seeds, show me the internal cooldown that as a progress bar. I used this a couple of times on PTR when we were testing some of the new encounters. Boss mods just hadn't been updated to support those fights yet because no one had seen them before. So I could go in and use WeakAuras to create something that showed the internal cooldown on Ultrazion or Ultraxion, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, his Fading Light buff. So I could say, oh, I know that he just cast it, it's not going to be cast again for 30 seconds. So it's safe to use all of my cooldowns. I won't have to jump out midway through having wings and a potion and all of that stuff up just to avoid the Fading Light debuff and dying. I used it also during Ragnaros when timers for meteors were kind of flaky. I just made my own that roughly estimated it. So I hope that was useful. Good luck. You should be able to modify that to work with just about any trinket or any other sort of internal cooldown. Take care.